Sarah Mitchell had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent their evenings at the mall or watching television, she could be found at the local gym, lifting weights that made grown men pause and stare. At 19, she stood 5 feet 8 inches tall with muscles that spoke of countless hours of dedication and discipline. The daughter of a Marine Corps veteran, Sarah grew up hearing stories of honor, courage, and service. Her father, James Mitchell, had served 3 tours overseas before returning home to raise his family. He never pressured Sarah to follow a military path, but he did instill in her the values that would later shape her destiny. Every morning before school, he would take her for runs through the neighborhood, teaching her that mental toughness was just as important as physical strength. When Sarah announced her intention to join the Navy after high school graduation, her family was supportive but worried. The military had changed since her father's time, and women were now allowed in combat roles, but the path she was choosing was still largely uncharted territory. Sarah had her sights set on becoming a Navy SEAL, one of the most elite special forces units in the world. The SEAL program had only recently opened to women, and the statistics were sobering. The dropout rate for male candidates hovered around 80%, and no woman had yet successfully completed the grueling training. Sarah knew the odds were stacked against her, but she also knew that someone had to be first. She spent months preparing her body and mind for what lay ahead. Her preparation routine was intense and methodical. She woke up at 4:30 every morning to swim laps in the community pool, focusing on building the kind of endurance that would be crucial during Hell Week. Her afternoons were dedicated to strength training, but not the kind that built show muscles. Instead, she focused on functional strength, carrying heavy loads, rope climbing, and exercises that mimicked the physical demands she would face during SEAL training. The mental preparation was equally important. Sarah studied everything she could about SEAL training, reading books by former operators and watching documentaries about the selection process. She learned about the psychological techniques used to break down candidates, understanding that the goal was not just to test physical capabilities but to identify those with the mental resilience to operate under extreme stress. Her family watched with a mixture of pride and concern as Sarah transformed herself into something resembling a weapon. Her younger brother, Mike, often joked that she could probably beat up half the football team at their local high school. Sarah never responded to these comments with arrogance, but there was a quiet confidence in her eyes that suggested she knew exactly what she was capable of. The day finally came when Sarah reported to Naval Station Great Lakes for basic training. The bus ride from Texas to Illinois gave her time to reflect on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about all the people who had told her she was crazy, all the doubts that had crept into her mind during the darkest moments of her preparation. But she also thought about her father's words, "The only limits that matter are the ones you place on yourself." Basic training was challenging but manageable for someone with Sarah's level of preparation. She excelled in physical fitness tests and demonstrated natural leadership abilities that caught the attention of her instructors. Her fellow recruits initially viewed her with skepticism. A young woman who claimed she wanted to become a SEAL seemed almost like a fantasy to them. But, as the weeks progressed and they watched her perform, that skepticism began to transform into respect. The swimming portions of basic training were where Sarah truly shined. While other recruits struggled with the water confidence tests, she moved through the pool like she had been born in it. Her technique was flawless, her endurance seemingly endless. Instructors who had seen thousands of candidates pass through their programs began to whisper among themselves that this young woman might actually have what it took. As basic training neared its end, Sarah faced her first real test of character. A senior instructor, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, approached her after a particularly grueling day of exercises. He looked at her with eyes that had seen combat in 3 different theaters of war and asked a simple question, "Mitchell, do you really think you have what it takes to become a SEAL?" Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Chief, I didn't come this far to find out if I could do it. I came this far because I know I can." Her voice was steady, confident without being cocky. Chief Rodriguez nodded slowly, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He had heard similar declarations from hundreds of recruits over the years, but something in Sarah's voice told him this one might be different. 6 months after completing basic training, Sarah found herself standing on the beaches of Coronado, California, staring at the Pacific Ocean that would become both her greatest challenge and her most formidable teacher. The Naval Special Warfare Training Center loomed behind her, a place where dreams were either forged into reality or crushed under the weight of impossibility. The first phase of SEAL training, known as Basic Underwater Demolition/SEAL Training or BUD/S, was designed to break people. The instructors made no secret of this fact. On the first day, as Sarah and her class of 47 other candidates stood in formation, Instructor Chief Williams painted a stark picture of what lay ahead. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned his position through blood, sweat, and unwavering determination, "over the next 24 weeks, we are going to push you beyond every limit you think you have. Most of you will quit. Statistics say that only 8 or 9 of you will make it through to graduation. The question is not whether you are tough enough. The question is whether you want it badly enough to endure when wanting it is all you have left." Sarah felt the familiar surge of determination that had carried her through every challenge in her life. Around her, she could see some of her classmates shifting nervously, already planting seeds of doubt in their own minds. She made a mental note of their faces, knowing that they would likely be gone within the first few weeks. The physical training began immediately and was unlike anything Sarah had experienced, despite her extensive preparation. The instructors seemed to take particular pleasure in making the exercises as uncomfortable as possible. Push-ups were done in the sand, which meant each repetition ground particles into exposed skin. Running was conducted in boots that filled with sand and water, turning every step into an exercise in futility that somehow had to be endured anyway. But it was the water training that truly separated the contenders from the pretenders. Sarah discovered that all her hours in the community pool back home had been like practicing piano scales compared to playing a concert at Carnegie Hall. The instructors threw them into the ocean in conditions that would terrify experienced swimmers, demanding they perform complex tasks while fighting against waves and currents that seemed determined to drag them under. During one particularly brutal water exercise, Sarah found herself paired with Rodriguez, a tough kid from Chicago who had initially expressed doubts about having a woman in the class. They were required to swim 2 miles in full gear while carrying a rubber boat between them. Halfway through the exercise, Rodriguez began to struggle, his technique falling apart as exhaustion set in. Without hesitation, Sarah adjusted her position to take on more of the boat's weight, allowing Rodriguez to focus on simply staying afloat. She never said a word about it, never called attention to what she was doing. She simply did what was necessary to ensure they both completed the task. Rodriguez never forgot that moment, and word of Sarah's actions spread quietly through the class. The psychological warfare was constant and creative. Instructors would wake them at random hours for emergency drills that served no purpose other than to deprive them of sleep and test their mental resilience. They were forced to perform complex calculations while doing calisthenics, ensuring that their minds remained sharp even as their bodies screamed for relief. Sarah's background had prepared her well for this type of mental challenge. Years of discipline and self-control had taught her how to compartmentalize discomfort, to separate what she was feeling from what she was capable of doing. While other candidates began to break down under the pressure, she remained focused and determined. The dropout rate was exactly as predicted. Every few days, another candidate would ring the bell that signified their withdrawal from the program. Some left in the middle of the night, unable to face their classmates. Others made dramatic announcements before walking away. Sarah watched each departure with a mixture of understanding and sadness, knowing that these were not weak people, but simply individuals who had reached the limits of what they were willing to endure. By the end of the 6th week, their class had been reduced to 22 candidates. Sarah had not only survived but had begun to stand out as one of the top performers. Her swimming times were among the fastest in the class, her physical fitness scores consistently ranked in the top 3, and her attitude remained positive even during the most challenging exercises. It was during this time that she first encountered General Patricia Hayes, a visiting officer who was conducting an inspection of the training facility. General Hayes was a decorated veteran with over 20 years of service, someone who had risen through the ranks at a time when opportunities for women in the military were far more limited than they were today. The general observed several training exercises, taking notes and speaking quietly with the instructors. Sarah noticed her watching but focused on her performance, determined not to let the presence of a high-ranking officer distract from her training. What she didn't know was that General Hayes was specifically there to evaluate how the integration of women into SEAL training was progressing. During a break between exercises, General Hayes approached Sarah directly. The conversation was brief but significant, with the general asking pointed questions about Sarah's motivation and her assessment of the training program. Sarah answered honestly and respectfully, but without the deference that might have been expected when speaking to such a high-ranking officer. "I'm here for the same reason as everyone else, General," Sarah said when asked about her goals. "I want to serve my country at the highest level possible, and I believe I have the skills and determination to succeed in this program." The general nodded thoughtfully, making another note before moving on to speak with other candidates. Hell Week arrived like a storm that everyone could see coming but no one could truly prepare for. The 5.5-day endurance test was the crucible that would separate those destined to become SEALs from those who would return to regular Navy service. Sarah had read about Hell Week, studied accounts from former SEALs, and thought she understood what to expect. She quickly discovered that reading about something and experiencing it were entirely different things. The week began at sunset on a Sunday with what the instructors called breakout. Suddenly, the relative calm of regular training exploded into chaos. Instructors appeared from everywhere, screaming orders, firing blank ammunition, and setting off smoke grenades. The candidates were ordered to bear crawl through mud pits while instructors sprayed them with cold water from fire hoses. Within the first hour, 2 candidates had already rung the bell. Sarah watched them walk away, their heads down, their dreams of becoming SEALs over before Hell Week had truly begun. She felt a moment of sympathy for them, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it. Survival required total focus on the immediate task at hand. Sleep became a luxury that existed only in brief, stolen moments. The candidates were allowed a total of 4 hours of sleep over the entire week, usually broken into 20-minute intervals that were interrupted by urgent whistles and shouted orders. Sarah learned to fall asleep instantly whenever the opportunity presented itself, even while standing in formation. The physical challenges were relentless and often seemed impossible. The class was required to carry heavy rubber boats over their heads while running on the beach, the boats acting like sails that caught every gust of ocean wind and threatened to knock the exhausted candidates off their feet. They performed hundreds of push-ups and sit-ups in the sand, the grains working their way into every piece of clothing and every fold of skin. But the ocean remained the most formidable opponent. The instructors seemed to delight in sending the class into the surf at the most uncomfortable times possible. At 2 a.m, when bodies were already pushed beyond reasonable limits, whistles would blow and candidates would be ordered to link arms and run into the freezing Pacific. They would stand in the water, waves crashing over their heads, while instructors calmly explained the next evolution of training. It was during one of these surf sessions that Sarah truly began to understand what separated those who would make it from those who wouldn't. Standing in chest-deep water at 3 a.m, her body shaking uncontrollably from the cold, she watched as Rodriguez began to lose his grip on reality. His eyes had taken on a vacant look, and he was mumbling to himself about wanting to go home. Sarah positioned herself next to him, using her body to help shield him from the worst of the waves. "Stay with me, Rodriguez," she whispered between chattering teeth. "Don't go inside your head. Stay right here with me." She began talking to him about his family, his hometown, anything to keep his mind engaged and prevent him from sliding into the mental space where quitting seemed like the only reasonable option. Her intervention worked. Rodriguez made it through that night and several more before ultimately ringing the bell on Thursday morning. Before he left, he sought out Sarah to thank her for keeping him going as long as she had. "You're going to make it," he told her with absolute certainty. "You're tougher than any of us." By Thursday afternoon, their class had been reduced to 11 candidates. The attrition rate was higher than usual, something the instructors attributed to the particularly challenging weather conditions they had encountered during the week. Sarah was not only still standing but had emerged as an unofficial leader among the surviving candidates. It was during the final night of Hell Week that the incident occurred that would change everything. The remaining candidates were in the middle of a boat exercise, carrying their rubber craft over a series of obstacles while instructors provided motivation through constant verbal pressure. General Hayes had returned to observe the final phases of Hell Week, accompanied by several other high-ranking officers who were evaluating the integration program. The exercise was not going well. Exhausted beyond normal human limits, the candidates were struggling to coordinate their movements. The boat kept slipping from their grasp, adding precious minutes to their time and increasing the frustration of the watching instructors. Sarah could see that several of her classmates were on the verge of mental breakdown. General Hayes was standing nearby, observing the chaos with what appeared to be a disapproving expression. Sarah heard her make a comment to one of the accompanying officers about the candidate's performance being disappointing and questioning whether the standards had been lowered to accommodate female participants. Something inside Sarah snapped. Not in the way that would lead to quitting, but in the way that revealed the core of who she truly was. With her classmates struggling around her and the boat threatening to fall again, she made a decision that was equal parts inspiration and desperation. "I can defeat your general," Sarah announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, including General Hayes herself. The statement hung in the air like a challenge, impossible to take back. Every instructor, every candidate, and every visiting officer stopped what they were doing to stare at her. General Hayes stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Excuse me, candidate?" Sarah realized there was no backing down from what she had started. "I said I can defeat your general, ma'am. Any challenge you want to set. Physical, mental, whatever you think will prove that we belong here." Her voice was steady despite the exhaustion, confident despite the enormous risk she was taking. The beach fell silent except for the sound of waves hitting the shore. Sarah had just challenged a general officer in front of multiple witnesses, potentially ending her military career before it had truly begun. But she had also done something else. She had drawn a line in the sand and dared someone to cross it. General Hayes studied Sarah with the calculating gaze of someone who had spent decades evaluating people under pressure. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then, unexpectedly, a slight smile played at the corners of the general's mouth. "You want to challenge me, candidate?" General Hayes said, stepping closer. "You think you can defeat a general officer who has been serving this country since before you were born?" Sarah maintained eye contact, her exhaustion temporarily forgotten in the face of this confrontation. "Yes, ma'am, I do. But not because of rank or experience. Because I know what I'm capable of, and I know why I'm here." What happened next surprised everyone present, including the instructors who had seen thousands of interactions between candidates and visiting officers. General Hayes began removing her jacket and rolling up her sleeves. "Very well, candidate. You want to prove yourself? Let's see what you've got." The challenge that emerged was both simple and brutal. General Hayes, despite being 20 years older than Sarah, was in remarkable physical condition. She had been a competitive athlete before joining the military and had maintained her fitness throughout her career. She proposed a series of physical challenges that would test not just strength and endurance, but mental toughness and tactical thinking. The first challenge was a swimming race across a section of the bay that was notorious for its strong currents. Both women entered the water wearing full gear, including boots and fatigues that would become heavy and restrictive once soaked. The instructors established a course that would require approximately 15 minutes of hard swimming for someone in peak condition. Sarah had expected General Hayes to be in good shape, but she had underestimated just how good. The general moved through the water with the efficiency of someone who had spent countless hours perfecting her technique. For the first half of the race, they swam stroke for stroke, neither gaining a significant advantage over the other. It was in the second half that Sarah's youth and specialized training began to show. Her breathing remained controlled while the general's started to become labored. Her stroke maintained its power while the general's began to show signs of fatigue. Sarah touched the finish point a full 30 seconds ahead of her opponent, but she immediately swam back to assist the general in completing the course. "I don't need your help, candidate," General Hayes said as Sarah approached, but there was no anger in her voice. If anything, she seemed impressed by the gesture. The second challenge was a test of upper body strength, maximum pull-ups with no time limit. This was an area where Sarah expected to have a significant advantage. She was younger, had been training specifically for these types of exercises, and had the benefit of recent conditioning that the general lacked. General Hayes went first, attacking the pull-up bar with a determination that suggested she had something to prove. She completed 23 pull-ups before her muscles gave out, a performance that would have been impressive for someone half her age. When she dropped from the bar, she was breathing heavily but seemed satisfied with her effort. Sarah approached the bar knowing that she needed to do more than simply beat the general's number. She needed to demonstrate the kind of performance that justified her bold challenge. She began her set with smooth, controlled movements, focusing on perfect form rather than speed. The watching crowd grew silent as she passed 23, then 30, then kept going. At 42 pull-ups, Sarah's muscles were screaming for relief, but her mind remained focused. She had discovered during her training that the body could continue long after the mind wanted to quit, but only if she could maintain mental discipline. At 51 pull-ups, she finally released the bar, having set a new record for the training facility. The third and final challenge was proposed by General Hayes herself, and it was the most revealing of all. She wanted to test tactical thinking under pressure. Both women were given identical sets of equipment and told to construct a defensive position that would protect against an imaginary enemy attack. They had 30 minutes to complete the task while instructors provided distracting enemy fire through the use of blank ammunition and smoke grenades. This challenge revealed something important about both women. General Hayes approached the problem with the systematic thinking of someone who had studied military tactics for decades. Her position was technically sound, following established principles that had been proven effective in combat situations. She worked methodically, checking and rechecking each element of her defense. Sarah's approach was different but equally impressive. Her defensive position showed innovative thinking that incorporated unconventional elements. She had clearly studied the same tactical principles as the general, but she was willing to adapt and modify them based on the specific conditions she was facing. Her position was not just technically sound but showed creative problem-solving that impressed the watching instructors. When the exercise was complete, both women stood before their constructions, exhausted but proud of their work. General Hayes examined Sarah's position carefully, asking detailed questions about specific choices and modifications. It became clear that she was not just evaluating the work but was genuinely interested in the thinking behind it. "Candidate Mitchell," the general said finally, "you have succeeded in defeating me in 2 out of 3 challenges. More importantly, you have demonstrated something that cannot be taught in any training program. You have shown courage, not just physical courage, but the moral courage to stand up for what you believe in, even when the odds are stacked against you." The general paused, looking out at the ocean where they had raced earlier. "When I made my comment about standards being lowered, I was testing you and your classmates. I wanted to see how you would respond to doubt and criticism. Most people would have let it slide, or would have responded with anger or defensiveness. You responded with action." She turned back to face Sarah directly. "That is exactly the kind of thinking and determination we need in our special operations forces. The willingness to step up when others step back, to take responsibility when others look for excuses, to find a way when others see only obstacles." The watching crowd had grown during the challenges, with off-duty instructors and other personnel gathering to witness this unprecedented event. As General Hayes finished speaking, a spontaneous round of applause broke out, something that had never happened during Hell Week in the history of the program. The rest of Hell Week passed in a blur of exhaustion and determination. Sarah's confrontation with General Hayes had created a shift in the dynamic of the training that everyone could feel but few could articulate. The remaining candidates seemed to draw strength from what they had witnessed, pushing themselves harder than they had thought possible. When the sun rose on Friday morning, officially marking the end of Hell Week, 9 candidates remained standing. Sarah was among them, but more than that, she had emerged as the unofficial leader of the group. Her willingness to challenge authority when she believed it was necessary had earned her a level of respect that typically took years to develop. The graduation ceremony for Hell Week was traditionally a subdued affair. The candidates were too exhausted to celebrate, and the instructors were already focused on the challenges that lay ahead in the remaining phases of training. But this graduation was different. General Hayes had requested permission to address the surviving candidates, an unprecedented honor. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general began, "you have just completed one of the most challenging training evolutions in the United States military. The fact that you are standing here means that you possess something special, something that cannot be bought or taught or faked. You have demonstrated the kind of character that our nation depends on in its darkest moments." She paused, her gaze settling on Sarah for a moment before continuing. "But, completing Hell Week is just the beginning. The training ahead of you will be even more challenging because it will test not just your physical and mental limits, but your judgment and decision-making under conditions that simulate real combat operations." The weeks that followed proved the general's words to be prophetic. The second and third phases of SEAL training introduced weapons training, demolitions, land warfare tactics, and small unit operations. The physical demands remained intense, but they were now combined with complex technical skills that required absolute mastery. Sarah excelled in every phase of training, but it was during the land warfare portion that she truly distinguished herself. The candidates were required to plan and execute mock military operations against instructor teams who had years of real combat experience. These exercises were designed to be nearly impossible to complete successfully, with the goal being to teach candidates how to adapt and overcome when everything goes wrong. During one particularly challenging exercise, Sarah's team was tasked with infiltrating an enemy position and gathering intelligence without being detected. The operation required them to move through several miles of difficult terrain at night, avoid multiple security checkpoints, and complete their mission within a narrow time window. The plan they developed was ambitious and complex, relying on precise timing and flawless execution. Sarah had been chosen as the team leader, a responsibility that she took seriously. She spent hours studying maps and intelligence reports, looking for weaknesses in the enemy defenses that her team could exploit. The operation began well, with the team successfully navigating the initial obstacles and reaching their first checkpoint ahead of schedule. But, as often happened in these exercises, things began to go wrong just as they approached their target. One team member was killed by enemy fire, another was wounded and required assistance, and their primary route to the objective was blocked by an unexpected patrol. It was in this moment of crisis that Sarah demonstrated why she had earned the respect of her instructors and classmates. Rather than abandoning the mission or becoming paralyzed by the complications, she quickly adapted the plan to account for the new circumstances. She reorganized her remaining team members, identified an alternate route to the objective, and devised a way to complete the mission despite having fewer personnel than originally planned. The modified operation was a complete success. Sarah's team not only gathered the required intelligence but did so without being detected by the enemy forces. When the exercise concluded and the instructors debriefed the performance, they acknowledged that Sarah's leadership and tactical thinking had been exceptional. Word of her performance spread quickly through the SEAL community. Active duty operators who served as instructors began to take notice of the young woman who had not only survived the rigorous training but was excelling at it. Veterans who visited the training facility asked to meet her, curious to see for themselves the candidate who was generating so much discussion. But perhaps the most significant recognition came from General Hayes, who requested a private meeting with Sarah as the training program neared its end. The general had been following Sarah's progress through regular reports from the instructors, and she had a proposal that would change the trajectory of Sarah's career. "Candidate Mitchell," the general began, "your performance throughout this training has been remarkable. Not just your physical abilities, though those are certainly impressive, but your leadership qualities and tactical thinking. You have demonstrated exactly the kind of capabilities that we need in our special operations forces." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I am recommending you for immediate assignment to an advanced training program that will prepare you for deployment with one of our most elite SEAL teams. This is not an opportunity that is offered to many graduates, and it comes with significant responsibilities and risks." Sarah listened carefully, understanding that this was a moment that would define her future. The advanced program would be even more demanding than what she had already completed, and success would mean deployment to active combat zones where the training would become reality. "General," Sarah said, "I appreciate the confidence you are showing in me. This is exactly why I joined the Navy, and I am ready for whatever challenges lie ahead. 3 months later, Sarah graduated from SEAL training as the first woman to successfully complete the program. The graduation ceremony was attended by high-ranking officials from throughout the military, and her achievement was recognized as a historic milestone. But, for Sarah, the ceremony was just another step in a journey that had begun years earlier in a small Texas town. As she stood with her fellow graduates, Sarah thought back to the moment on the beach when she had challenged General Hayes. That confrontation had revealed something important, not just about her own capabilities, but about what was possible when someone was willing to push beyond conventional limitations. The young woman who had once lifted weights in a small-town gym had become something that many believed was impossible. She had proven that determination, combined with proper training and unwavering commitment, could overcome any obstacle. More importantly, she had opened a door for others to follow, demonstrating that the only real limits are the ones people choose to accept.